I'm in Dallas.
Oh, okay. So
And
like, yeah, you're in the thick of it, right?
yeah, and just so, because I know people in the north are like, okay, well, this isn't that bad. We get this, we can get this in one day. And I explained it this. I had somebody ask me the other day why was this, such a discombobulating thing for Texas? And I said, you have to understand, this would be like you having the weather you have had all, for the past month or so, where it's cold and rainy and snowing, and and sometimes it's even below zero, or it's consistently below freezing, and then one day, and then one week, suddenly it's 110.
Yeah.
You would be like, whoa, wait, what? We're not. There's a reason why Texans have big closets, and it's because literally there's a running joke that if you don't like the weather in Texas, wait a minute, and it'll change. So nobody's really built for long stretches of cold. We're built a little better for long stretches of hot, but cold is a whole other thing. I mean, you don't buy the heavy winter coat and all of the sweaters because you rarely get to wear them, kind of thing. So that was part of the thing I think that caught us all unawares was, just it's hard to prep for something that the stores don't even carry,
But it literally
really.
hasn't happened in 100 years or more.
Right. I mean, we've gotten big ice storms before. I remind my husband all the time of the last one, which was the first time and only time that Dallas hosted the Super Bowl,
Mm-hmm.
and it iced over. And I was also pregnant with my son at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we were demoing and redoing our only bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
and I was 7 months pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Up staying for a week, that entire week, because it was pretty slick and everything, that with friends, because clearly you could not, because our poor plumber, our poor carpenter couldn't get any supplies in. Nobody could get in. It was bad, but not as bad as this is the worst I've ever seen it. But yeah, I literally wrote 3 stories on my iPhone.
Yeah, yeah,
I filed
that's
them.
what it's fascinating because no power, no internet. Like, how does that even work? I mean, I've been through it, right? I've been through hurricanes reporting, and you just depend on data, right? Is
Mhm.
that what you had to do?
Pretty much. I have another colleague. She and I do the lion's share of the reporting, and we quickly realized that neither one of us had power.
Hmm.
And so we started coming up with. We'd kind of talked ahead of time. Now this is the funny part. We publish once a month. We publish a monthly publication in print, and then the rest of the time it's online. Our monthly publication was due to go to bed the Monday that the power went out.
Mm.
Our executive editor kind of had this just this gut feeling. And Saturday night, he emails all of us and says, "Hey, how do you guys feel about working on Sunday, just so that we can get this out in case we don't in case we don't have power?" So a lot of us worked Sunday,
Hmm.
you know, just to get all the pages proofed, to get it sent to the printer in case. And it turned out to be very like a very good gut feeling that we should do this, because none of us had power on Monday consistently. So, but because of that, normally you get a little breather between your production week and like the next big, getting gearing up for the next production week. So that didn't happen because we were basically covering a huge news story. She and I talked, and we decided that we would attempt to put stories up, at least one story, just kind of as a digest form. This is what you need to know kind of thing, a day. And then we would work on it together. We kind of someone would go into WordPress and start the story. And then, we'd kind of fill it out, and then we'd publish it. And it was interesting because, like I said, we did, half the time we didn't have a computer. We weren't able to, use our laptops or anything else. So, because we were really trying to conserve power. I had 5 of those external battery packs charged up. I had gone through and dug through my online, my O&A convention bag that I carry where I carry all these extra battery packs. I dug through that, and I dug through a couple other, just found all of our battery packs, and I felt like I had a good, enough juice for a little bit.
Yeah.
So we were able to do that, but the rest of the time we spent putting out information on Twitter and Facebook, because that was the fastest way to get information out and the most reliable for both of us. And it was a little easier on our thumbs than trying to write, full stories.
I think there's some sort of transition, not some sort of, there is a transition during an emergency like this where it's more about the reporting and getting information out for people to know things they need to know to stay safe, or like if they need gas, what to do in certain situations versus just, posting to that online website. You want to get it out any way you can. Is that what it feels like for you?
Yeah, we would basically, we kind of did a little pivot on on Instagram and stuff like that. We would post, little slides that said, if you're wanting the most up-to-date information, follow us on, Twitter and Facebook. And that helped a lot, we had probably the best engagement we've had ever. I take that back. We had a lot. We had a tornado hit, an F3 tornado hit in October of 2019. And that was I had been working at this publication for 2 weeks when that tornado hit. Started covering it from my linen closet.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's how close I was to it. So that one was a pretty heavy engagement period too, because we discovered we're really hyper local, and we discovered the beauty in hyper local is that we can provide the stuff that like the Dallas Morning News and some of the others couldn't, like during we'd gotten kind of a dry run for all of this through the tornado. We realized that people couldn't load. It was also just a matter of practicality. With a cell phone tower out or without electricity, people can't load your website more often than not. It takes a long time. So being able to disseminate small chunks of information on Twitter and that kind of thing, where people can pull that up and people can see it, it's a little easier to load, was important. We learned after the tornado, people wanted to know how to get home. All of the arteries to the neighborhood that was struck the hardest were all either backed up because you couldn't drive other streets because they were blocked with debris, or they were, it was just a mess. It took me 2 hours, which is normal. My normal commute's like 20 minutes. It took me 2 hours to get home one day after the tornado. So telling people how to get home, telling people at the beginning how to get to work without spending 2 hours on the road, those were the kinds of things that people cared about. So we realized during these kinds of situations that the best thing we can do is to hone on what people really need to know in our market right away. And this time there was a bit of overlap and it's been that way with the pandemic too, knowing where to go to sign up to get your COVID shots, knowing where, that kind of thing. And then this time, knowing where to sign up for FEMA aid, knowing how to vet a plumber, and that kind of thing. One day during all of this, my son and I had seen this TikTok where someone had taken the insert of their crock pot and like several candles and made like this little this little like radiant warmer heater. And so we decided we would do it. He was bored, and I thought, I'm just going to take a picture of this and see, and post it on our social media and let people see, hey, we're sitting here trying to figure this out too. We're a little chilly, let's see if this works. And it got so many questions. Is it working? Do you feel warmer?
Yes, I am pretty sure I don't know if it was during the hurricane, it's so funny. We do so many stories. I can't remember half of them that I do, but we did some sort of like when COVID started, making your own hand sanitizer, and there were so many videos going out on Twitter, YouTube about how to make your own hand sanitizer. So of course I got tasked with the story of, does this work? What does the CDC say? Let's make our own hand sanitizer. But people love those stories, especially on social.
I mean, they're like, is it work? Is it working? And I'm like, well, my house smells really great. Because we only own Boogie candles. So like, we don't, I learned, and this is a story that we're working on now, the value in possibly, because we've had a few significant outages. There was one a couple years ago in the summer, where we ended up just decamping for a hotel because it was so miserable, where the power went out in large chunks of the city for several days. We were without power for 3 or 4 days, and the temps were like over 100. And so we ended up finding a hotel and staying there for a few days until we could get back, until we could come back home. It was but I told my husband, I'm like, I realize now that there are things that we could probably have in this house that would make our lives a lot easier during this, So I have a whole Amazon wish list that I've made. It's like, disaster. It's called the disaster box.
Yeah, it's emergency. I was gonna say, I have, because I've covered literal convention, because they have like hurricane conventions down here, of course, right? They probably do in Texas and the Gulf too. But they give away stuff like those glow sticks, like those giant glow sticks, like all this random stuff I have in the pantry from those conventions, where I'm like, well, we might be able to use it at some time, right?
I mean, my son's in Boy Scouts, so some of the stuff they'll be able to use, for that too. But like we discovered, and I'm like, I'm sure there's a scientific reason for this. I'm just too tired to look it up. Inflatable mattresses tend to deflate very quickly when it's super cold.
Oh yeah. So, it's like a tire. When it's cold, you get pressure.
So my poor son was sleeping on one, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night, and he'd be more like a hammock, because like the top and the bottom, the two ends would be full of air, and the part where he was sleeping would be depressed, and he slept pretty well like that. But my husband and I, did not sleep that well. We have a gas fireplace in our living room, and that's where we all kind of camped out for the bulk of it. And so I think maybe some camp cots would be beneficial at this point. Like, you guys can still use them when you go camping, but it would be great to have something where we, that's a little less, that's a little more reliable than an inflatable mattress. And then, I found these camp stoves that use sterno that are like $11 a piece or something. And I'm like, okay, that's something we can throw in a box and keep. And then when we, have this kind of situation, we can at least be able to heat up water for coffee. My poor husband was standing out there on our grill trying to boil water in sub-zero temperatures to get coffee. And I felt so bad for him, because he got it boiling, and then all the lights came on for our, designated hour of
So I have to tell this story before I forget, because I forget really easy. But pertaining to the inflatable mattresses, so there was a time at the end of my college career where I just had one semester left. So I got pretty much a cheap hole in the wall apartment, because I don't even think I was staying there a lot. I was actually commuting because I had a job back home too, and it was only a couple hours away. But in case I needed to spend the night, or, went out with my friends, I had a place to sleep. Well, and a bed wouldn't even fit in this hole in the wall. It was literally like a cubby. And so I had an inflatable mattress in Minnesota. So it's cold. But every night, I kid you not, I had to keep the inflator like plugged in. In the middle of the night, I would just roll over and grab the remote, and it would be like at least like twice a night, because I was pretty much sleeping on the floor by the time like it reached midnight and I had to inflate it again. It was probably the longest 4 or 5 months of my life. It was a very long, restless time, but I was young and I could handle it. So
we were, my son, it didn't really faze him all that much. He'd wake up in the morning and he'd be like, wow, this thing really deflated. I mean, we're convinced that he could sleep on a cliff face and be fine with it, but my husband and I actually we have this chaise in because we converted our formal living room into more like it was my office pre-COVID because nobody was home. Now that everybody's home, I usually office in our bedroom. But so so we have this chaise. We don't really have a couch. So I was sleeping on that. My husband was sleeping on. He has this, it's a nice pad that goes with your, that you put underneath your sleeping bag when you're camping. So he had that, but still, that's not exactly the most comfortable thing to sleep on in the world. But we did okay. I think that, the saving grace was the power came on every hour, at least every 6 hours or so we could kind of disperse. We would turn on the heater at that point and let and let the house get up to a balmy 62.
That's cold. I mean, if you're living in Texas, I've been living in Florida for 7 years. That's cold.
I mean, it felt very warm after waking up at 45 or whatever, we're lucky because the house that we're in is, when we bought it, it was built in 1961 and we're like only the second family to live in it.
Wow.
And, but when we had the house inspector come through, he was just like, this house, they don't build houses like this anymore. They just don't, this is, and we discovered the merits of it really well during this because it stayed pretty warm. I mean, I wouldn't call 45 warm, but it was a hell of a lot warmer than some people had it, and I know it was warmer than our old home.
Which is not surprising to me because up north that did happen a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was kind of typical. You would hear of homeless people falling asleep on a bench and passing away because it was too cold. So like that doesn't surprise me. But I also just want to say for anyone who does watch this and people do wonder like, well, it's not that bad. Like why is there such an issue? It's because, in the South, like the infrastructure isn't there, right?
No, I mean, we bury our lines, but not all the time. Usually you're going to find that in newer subdivisions, not in the urban core. They're less likely to be buried. The other issue is that Texas is its own electrical grid. Mm-hmm. So, and and they deregulated. So it's kind of, in some ways it's fun. I think people were like, oh, yay, this means I can shop around for the cheapest rates, and that's true. Mm-hmm. But it also means that you get what you pay for, and because so there's this very convoluted way that electricity is delivered. Mm-hmm. In Texas, where you have the vendors that create the electricity, and then you have ERCOT deciding, basically controlling the flow of it. And then you have the individual power companies who deliver it. And then you have the Public Utilities Commission, which is supposed to oversee this whole shebang. Mm-hmm. And ERCOT and the PUC are all political appointees that get, that run this. And so there's not, it can be a bit murky and a bit hard to follow. And so a lot of people just see the end product, which is, okay, I can get my my electricity from Lyon, or I can get it from here, or I can get it from there. And and so I think that's the other thing that caught people unawares, is that if you just move here and you're like, okay, I get to pick my you think that Encore is the straight shot, that you're buying your energy from Encore and they're producing it. And that's not how it works. And it's the same thing with gas and water and everything else. Water a little less so, but because you have to, it's one thing that's kind of geographical. You have to be kind of close to it to deliver it. So, but gas is one of those things too. Just, I want to say 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years, there was a huge gas line explosion that killed a girl. It was early in the morning. Everybody's getting ready for school and work, and her house just exploded, and it killed her and several members of her family.
Oh my gosh.
It resulted in displacing hundreds of people in 2 separate neighborhoods that were divided by this one major street, because the pipes that delivered that gas were laid in the 50s and hadn't been replaced, even though the gas company Atmos was under a mandate to replace this pipe. There was no sense of urgency. So we're talking hundreds of people displaced for 2 weeks. Wow. Atmos gave them per diems, or a stipend to offset their hotel bills and stuff like that, but some people were renting and never saw that stipend. Wow. And so the same kind of scenario that created that issue has created this issue as well, because it's just all goes back to deregulation and who is telling these companies what they have to do. And often the people that are supposed to be telling these companies, you need to do this, work for those companies.
Yeah. That's why voting is so important.
It is. It's like, I tell people, all the time, like, it's super easy to say Texas brought this on themselves because it's true, but this can happen to any state. We're a cautionary tale for when someone comes and says, well, you could have cheaper electric rates if you did this or that. This is the downside to that open market. That free market doesn't always work for everyone, especially when it comes to a disaster. There was a bill like 3 years ago that if it had been passed, would have required weatherization of all of these. All these vendors would have had to weatherize and ensure that their turbines and their gas delivery, either natural gas delivery systems and everything else, were able to withstand cold temperatures for a duration. And it never made it off of the floor. And it was actually written and sponsored by the mayor of Dallas, the now mayor of Dallas.
Wow. I'm sure you reported on that.
Yeah. It was just, so sitting here and it's very hard because you don't want to be, as a reporter, you don't want to necessarily be the story, but I think that COVID and even this have changed the way reporters have to report, because I think people sometimes think that we're somehow immune to all of the things that can go wrong in life.
These are perfect opportunities, and maybe perfect is like not a great word for it, but to show our humanity, and show like we are your neighbors, we are your community, and we really are trying to do a really good job of getting you information. And I always would tell people, because you hear people, well, the media this and the media that, and they twist things. The last thing I want to do is like sit down and think of a way how, I can twist this. Like, I don't have that much time in the day.
Like, I don't think they understand exactly how full my day is right now, because there is, during a lot of this, especially in the early days of COVID and even this summer, when we would report on the new death tolls or the new, or when the numbers started, the case count started climbing again here. And we would get these comments like, it's not as bad as you're reporting, or this is such a small percentage, or, you're just fear mongering. And I would be like, yeah, my dudes, I have a fourth grader that's learning at home, and I am reporting pretty much all the time and repeating fourth grade on my I'm currently trying to navigate long division and fractions,
Yeah.
and I don't have time to just write a story and make stuff up, but I
would
think
actually take more effort and creativity than it is just to report the facts that we
right. I'm like, you guys need to, but but I feel like it's been important for us to kind of, say, like, I point blank said on our Twitter account, I was like, I'm cold. I'm really cold, guys. It's cold, and we did approach it with a little bit of humor because, and to sometimes, like, I remember at one point I just posted a meme from Bring It On, the cheer, where it's cold in here, like, those kind of things. We were just, it was like, and I remember at one point, because everybody was ERCOT kind of, they didn't do a great job with their messaging.
Yeah.
At one point they were tweeting, like, they tweeted different pictures of different appliances and different things and said, it basically encouraging people to turn this stuff off, but making it sound like if you didn't unplug you literally used the word like fancy appliances was the word that they used. They had a picture of like a nice KitchenAid mixer, but they literally made it sound like if you had forgotten to unplug your mixer, you were the reason why everybody's sitting in the dark and the cold. And so at one point, people were like, maybe our grid should be able to handle that.
Oh my gosh.
So,
yeah.
At one point they had posted, and they were really bad about explaining exactly what was going on. It's almost like someone had decided, let's use as much jargon as
this is a competitor,
possible.
right? This is a competitor.
So, well, it's that this is the electric. This is the
electric company.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're the ones they're the ones that provide energy to the providers. So you have so they're the ones that are telling Encore, or which is the electric provider for our area, you're going to have to shut more people down, because we still have too much drag. We still have too many people, too much demand on the grid. You're going to have to shut more homes down. You're going to have to do this. So at one point they just were, these updates they were giving were just so full of jargon. You had no idea what they were actually saying. And I'm like, and I looked at my husband, I'm like, I feel like I'm a pretty smart person.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they're saying exactly. It's like almost like this is intentional. Like they want to be able to say, well, we updated you a lot. And then, but hey, maybe you're just too dumb to understand it, kind of thing. But I felt better when other people actually cover energy were like, this doesn't make, I'm having a hard time explaining this to my readers. I felt like, oh, okay, it's not that I don't understand. It's like they're just being really obtuse right now. And but they at one point they had said something and it didn't make any sense. They're like, oh, to provide you an update, we're really invested in getting in getting everyone back online as soon as possible. And then they just it was like this gobbledygook right after it. And I responded with just like some gif of some, I think it was of someone just like rolling and it got so many likes and shares. So I feel like people like it when, especially during this stuff, when their reporter is kind of reacting the same way, And I will say this, Texas is often called a red state, but it's really more of a purple state that has a lot of gerrymandering going on. Mm-hmm. But and it's been pretty divided for a few years. It's been divided for a while, but it's been exacerbated over the past few years. this whole thing from last week was kind of a big uniter. Everybody had a common foe.
It's true. It's so true that like these awful things have to happen for us to be like, oh, we're all on the same page here, right?
We all, we're all going to go beat up on this one agency. It's going to be fun. Come on.
Or senator.
Oh yeah, that what was funny is there's still people out there that will be like, well, they deserved a vacation. He deserved a vacation.
Not during an emergency.
and I tried to explain, like, okay, here's the thing. If I was senator and my family was like, it's cold, we don't have any power, we found this great rate, for a hotel, or this great rate for, I'd like to take the kids to, to a beach or something to wait this out. I would say, well, I don't think it's a great idea. But if they insisted, I would then turn around proactively before it became a thing and say, hey, in the issue statement, it said, my family, like many, is, sitting in the dark and the cold. My, husband, my wife, whatever, has chosen to take our children someplace warmer to wait it out so that, they can play and not be miserable. But that, I'm not going with them. I'm staying put. And in a way, this is a good thing, because it will free me up to roll my sleeves up and help and whatever.
Even I know he like gave a statement or some sort of explanation as far as like he wanted to take them there, and then I was like, okay, I get that as a parent, right? But then when I was like, mom went, I was like, they're okay with mom. Like, you could have just like stayed home and mom was on the trip, right? Not a good choice.
He took a freaking big bag. I'm a little, not entirely convinced, that you need a big carry-on bag. I mean, if your bag needs wheels, then you plan on staying for a bit, I mean. So it was funny.
Judgment, I guess that can be.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like nobody told him not to do. I think that's why you hire good people. Yeah. Is that so you have people that will go,
someone told him.
Really not a good idea. That is really people, like there are other people on the airplane and they are definitely going to know who you are, because it looks like you had an unfortunate incident with a Remington beard trimmer and decided to do your own hair. You are easily identifiable, and you should probably not, at least go on a different plane at a different time. Yeah. So,
Well, I'm gonna kind of pivot here.
Okay.
I'm so glad that you talked about all of this, though, because I think it plays in. It's timely, obviously. I think it plays in really well to, this group is really about finding enterprise ideas, and what better time to, find those ideas in a crisis like this, where there's stories left and right. But I would love, first, before I forget to ask, is what are your Twitter handles? Because I was like searching and I was like, I didn't search your publication, but I couldn't find you. So are you?
My Twitter handle for me is hilarious. It's funny. I've had it since I had Twitter, and it came from a old job where I covered this very fancy part of town. Yeah. And so they jokingly said that so they called me the news princess. So I became TX News Princess when I got on Twitter, because it was just. Oh my gosh,
I love it.
And I can be, and I warn, and that one is I can be a little profane in that one occasionally, because that one's kind of the one where I kind of go, that's my reaction Twitter.
I'm gonna go on it because I already know I like you and I want to see what you say.
and then we have two different publications in print that so there's P Hollow People, which is for Preston Hollow People, and then the other one is PC People, which is Park Cities People, and those two are the straight and mostly straight. I mean, sometimes I have reactions in there too.
Yeah.
But our readers kind of like that voice. We actually have a different way we do our police blotter,
Yeah.
where it's actually more, because, okay, I have to say that the two areas we cover are the most affluent areas of
Okay.
Dallas County. So the crime, there's serious crime there that happens, yes, but most of the crime is a little boring. It's a lot of, they left their key fob in their car and it got stolen,
So you
or they
have to
left their
have
doors
humor
unlocked.
about it, right?
Right, they locked their doors. They didn't lock their doors, and someone stole their iPad off the front seat.
Yeah.
Or their Hermes bag, or their Birkin, or or somebody. It's a lot of stuff like that. So back, and this predates me. This was back when when the newspapers were started in 1981. They decided that they needed to be a little. So you will see stuff like a ne'er-do-well um, absconded with this lady, with a woman's purse that was on her front. How easy was it for a ne'er-do-well to abscond with a woman's purse in the 3200 block of Stanford Avenue? Well, she left the keys to the carriage, so, that kind of thing. So, and when we have in the most unusual crime of the week, it's called the skullduggery of the week. So, and it gets its own little special place in the crime reports. So that kind of tone is the kind of tone that we tend to kind of cultivate on Twitter as well, just because it kind of lends itself to that. But it's funny because people expect a little bit of snark from us, and so it's nice because I am super snarky.
I like it. So, I love having a little personality. I feel like sometimes people are a little bit too straight. Like, I think you can still have personality and be objective, right? Because we're all our own people.
And I think you can even have an opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can even have an opinion and still be able to effectively present both sides of a discussion, or all sides of a discussion.
Yeah, I would say it's completely impossible to not have an opinion as a human being.
No.
It's just being able to keep it, tell both sides effectively, right?
Right. I mean, I worked for a paper where we weren't allowed to go vote. We were highly discouraged from voting in any primary.
Yeah.
The general, it was fine, but because people could look up and see which primary we voted in, they would tell us not to vote in a primary. We were not supposed to have any yard signs or bumper stickers or anything like that, which is understandable. The primary thing is, I have some, I've also had some that didn't care. It's like, well, and so it's interesting to see. I think that I have kind of thought about that a little more, I will say, whether I should go vote in a primary or not, just because of how partisan things have gotten and how people take one tiny nugget of information and create an entire story, or, well, not really a story, but a narrative around it, whether they know the whole situation or not. So I told my husband there, like, I don't know if, voting in a primary is something I need to continue, doing right now. I don't want it to taint what I'm doing and make people say, oh, she voted Republican in the Republican primary, or she voted for, or she only votes in, if they wouldn't look long enough, they'd know that I vote back and forth. I ping pong back and forth between them, because there are a lot of yahoos that vote. And so sometimes you vote in the other one so that you can make sure that yahoo doesn't actually make it on the ballot and possibly win. But yeah, I mean, I was just kind of.
You just never know. I think that's the message there.
Yeah.
Do you have, like, throughout all of this, I always ask people, because I know the answer is no, but do you have any sort of like specific secret to finding good enterprise content? Or I think that really the best way is connections, but I always ask, like, what is your process?
Honestly, it's a little, it kind of goes back to good old fashioned beat reporting.
Mm-hmm.
If you know your beat, and it's a lot harder to do it nowadays because so many newsrooms have been pared down so much that people are covering multiple beats.
Mm-hmm.
But even including me, I cover pretty heavily education policy, but I'm also covering all this other stuff too. I have right now on my list of court cases, crime cases that I'm following. I have 6 cases.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are federal, some of them are local, that I have to keep tabs on and see what they're doing. And so, there's a lot going in there. So it's a little harder to do the traditional old school where you only have the one beat and you just know your sources and they kind of come to you.
Mm-hmm.
I am disciplined, I guess, a little bit. I go in once a week, and like when I go to look for courts and crime stuff, I have a specific set of places I go to. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Dallas, the DA's office, because they post all of their felony cases they've accepted, and then also the docket for the grand jury cases, and then the state, and then they have another post for the status of those grand jury cases. The Dallas Police Department has, I go through and look at their cases. The Texas Securities Board and the SEC, because we have a lot of people that trade. And so I have to look, and I catch a lot of stories that way too. And then, following school board, but some of the others, it's just, I happen to live in the same area I cover. So like, I've gotten 5 or 6 stories from next door. I'm currently working on one right now about a guy who built an owl habitat
Cool.
home, and he now has a family with 3 babies.
Oh,
And he's been like cataloging, he's been chronicling how they've, how first it was just this, he calls him Hootie. First it was Hootie, and then Mrs. Hootie joined Hootie, and now they have they have the triplets. And during this cold snap, he was letting us know how the triplets were doing and how they were eating, and
love that.
those kinds of things.
I don't know if you have seen this, but Southwest Florida has a eagle cam. It's like a live cam where you can watch the eagles, and there's like this narrative between the daddy eagle and the mommy eagle, and then there's baby eagles, and then there was like an affair. But people love that stuff, and the fact that there's like a live camera where you could wait for the eggs to hatch, it's just awesome.
But it's just stuff like that. I mean, I found we're working on a story right now about after because the way our production cycle falls, this whole thing is going to be kind of old news by the time the April issue gets ready to go to press. Mm-hmm. So, but we said, you know what, we're not going to cover, obviously there's going to be some aftermath stuff we could probably give. At that point, we'll be able to give updates on FEMA aid and all that stuff. But the big thing, I think the biggest story is this hyper local story of how people have been helping each other. Yeah. We've had, I was looking on Nextdoor, and there was a college kid that said, "Hey, I'm home for the weekend, or I'm home for the week. If you're infirm or elderly, or you're or you can't leave because you got kids at home and you need something, please message me. I'll help." There was a woman that offered up an empty 2-bedroom condo. She goes, it's got power and it's got water. If you want to come camp out in my empty condo, it's just complete strangers.
Yeah, love it.
And those kinds of things are the things that I think people, one, it makes them proud of their community, mm-hmm. And everything. And I think that those stories are important too. We had a woman that was in Preston Hollow that was gunned down in her car. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of, attention given by the press at the beginning of the whole thing, because it was unusual for crime to happen in that specific area. Yeah. And and it was such a brutal thing, an unexpected thing. She was just, sitting in her car, in her own driveway, when it happened.
Which we all
And
do.
we obviously covered the initial crime, but then it just so happened that she worked for a hospital conglomerate that my husband used to work for. And my husband still has, in that whole, there's like 3 major chain, four in this area that, but it all becomes a bit incestuous when it comes to the marketing teams. They kind of move around. You make a lot of lateral moves. So he was able to get me in touch with people that worked with her. And one of them said, I can get you, I let me talk to the family and let me talk and see. So she talked to the family, and they weren't ready to talk, but they gave her the names of like 4 different friends.
Wow.
That were ready to talk about her. So we did this story more about who she was. And the way we framed it was, we want to tell you the story about Leslie Baker and her life, and not the last 5 minutes of her life.
So there's a lot of young reporters in this group right now that I have, which I'll invite you to, by the way. But I would always say, because that's the hardest part of the job, is approaching situations like that. And I always approach it as, let's tell their story instead of, let's talk about, the tragic death, right?
Yeah.
And so I always say that, but the longer I've been in news, the truer that really is for me, because honestly, like, I do want to highlight who they were, because it's not fair to the family to relive what happened, right? They want that opportunity. And I've been thanked more times than I've had doors shut in my face for telling their story and caring about who that person was, versus, being the reporter who just wants to cover what happened.
And I think that too, and of course I have the benefit of kind of straddling 2 different worlds where I have print and digital. I think that there is merit sometimes in not being first, but being best.
Yes.
I think, and I tell our interns that all the time. I'm like, first isn't necessarily the best if, 1, you don't have a lot of verifiable information, obviously, but 2, you don't want to be the first person to knock on the door of that family's house and say, would you like to talk? Because the answer is always going to be no. But if you wait a bit and really, and come to them with, I came to that to her friends, and, through an intermediary, their family, with a solid, pitch. I don't want to write about, obviously we're going to have to mention what happened to her, but that is going to be a sentence, not the story. And the thing that hooked them was, I don't want to, the focus is not going to be this last 5 minutes in the car. The focus is her life, what her legacy, what she left, what she's left behind. Yeah. And that's, but there's a merit in being, in making your focus not be first necessarily, but best. There are times when first is important, but best is always going to be trump first. And I think that is something I tell our interns a lot, and we get new interns every fall, we get new interns every semester. And that's one of the big things that I tell them is, like, at the end of the day, I want to have had the better story, not necessarily the first story. And I think when you start really honing in on your storytelling and your craft, and you approach this as a craft, there's being able to get your facts straight is important. No lie. But being able to earn the trust of your subject and make them feel comfortable when you're talking to them is going to get you a far better story than than anything else. That's how you know, I mean, and awards aren't a lot, aren't everything, but the awards that we've won in the past couple of years have been based on the strength of our storytelling, and being able to earn not only our interview subjects trust, but people see that, people read that and go, wow, that was a good story. They really got that person to open up. And when something, and that's how you get your enterprise stories, is other people see how you treated Leslie Baker's family. And when something happens to them, they more often than not will reach out to you and say, hey, this happened. I mean, Leslie Baker's story begot this story about this boy named Henry, young man, I should say, call him a young man, because he was in his 20s when he died. He was in his early 20s when he died, whose sister contacted me because he was dying of cancer, and he had basically this bucket list that she was trying to help him fulfill. And one of those things, so we did this story about his trip to Colorado and his backyard wedding. And we had all these pictures and everything else. Those are the kinds of stories that people trust you with. They trust you with their life stories. And, it's important to know how to write a good, crime story, a good breaking news story. But if you want longevity in this career, and you want to actually enjoy this career and feel like you're doing something, then you have to earn trust.
I'm so glad I met you. I'm like over here like trying not to cry, but it's like exactly how I feel. And sometimes it takes years to get to where we are. I feel like where we really understand that, or have our own families to understand, the impact that you can have both positively and negatively. But I think that's 100% true, because I feel like 10 years ago when I started being a reporter, which sounds like a long time when you're young, but now I'm like 10 years is like a flash in the pan. And, you're really taught to be objective and like look at the story from the outside. But to be a good reporter or journalist, you do have to have those emotions and be connected to what you're saying and how you're approaching things, and earning that trust and, respect from the community and the people you're reporting on. So
I've actually told interview subjects before. There was a story about a girl who had been raped, and it was a statutory rape kind of situation where a guy had claimed during one of the hurricanes he came up to Dallas and took advantage of the fact that federal law means that you don't have to ask for ID to enroll in school. You can self-enroll, and they can't ask you for certain things. They just have to enroll you. He was actually like 24. He claimed he was a junior in high school. And they enrolled him, and then he immediately got a little 15-year-old girlfriend because he presented himself as a high school student, and that didn't seem odd, and it wasn't until another coach for another team recognized him as a kid who had graduated from another high school several years before, and kind of wrote, they realized what was going on. And this girl ended up suing the school district, and there was a lot of stuff that was, people were pretty harsh about it, really hard. If she would, if she wasn't, trying to have sex at such an early age, or she wasn't doing this, or she wasn't doing that. I mean, she changed schools, and it comes out through the lawsuit that she actually had apparently told a couple of coaches that this guy was not that her boyfriend was making her uncomfortable and asking her to do things that she didn't feel she was ready to do. So in the course of this, I remember point blank saying, I don't want you to feel like you have to talk to me. and ultimately I ended up interviewing her lawyer and not her, because I knew that that I said this, being interviewed for a newspaper. I said, this is when they Google you, they're going to find, for the rest of your life. I said, this is a life altering decision that you're thinking about doing. And you have your entire life to make it. So don't feel like you have to talk to me on the record right now.
Yeah.
And, I know some editors would be like, oh, like she was willing to talk to you. And I'm like,
a few years ago, I legitly started telling people, I said, I'm not going to beg you to talk to me, because if you don't want to talk to me, like, I respect that. And I love the way you put it, because it's so true. Our job is to not create more damage, right?
Yeah.
And if you can report the story without doing that, then by all means.
There have been times where I have said, people have offered to go on the record, you can put my name on this. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. We had an instance during the height of COVID where a restaurant was actually not allowing its servers and staff to wear masks. They said it didn't go with the aesthetic of and so we started getting emails. Well, we got one tip from a friend of a server, and I just put it out there that we had heard this, is all I said. And we got 5 or 6 people that worked they had 3 different restaurants in town, from these 3 different restaurants saying, yeah, this is what we were told. And I called the restaurant and asked to speak to the manager and said, this is what I'm hearing. She's like, yeah, we're not allowing masks. And I'm like, yeah. But so we wrote the story, but I had a couple of them say, I'll go on the record.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't, this is one of those instances where I'm allowed to give you anonymity. I think you should take it.
Yeah.
I think you should take it. And ultimately, she did. And ultimately she ended up suing for a protective order.
Right.
Because what they were doing was they would say, you can wear a mask, but we won't give you any hours.
Wow.
So, I have point blank said before, people that were willing to talk on the record, if I did not feel it was in their best interest to talk on the record at that moment, I've actually done what I feel is the ethical thing and said, I can write this story without you being on the record, or without using your name, or, let me do that for you. And because I've done that, you end up with sources for life. And that goes, which goes back to your, to, I think, the whole enterprise reporting bit, is that the best enterprise stories come from people that trust you. So if you have those sources for life, those people that remember, hey, she was very honorable in her dealings with me during a particularly scary time or a particularly rough time, then they're going to tell their friends when something happens, hey, you need to call so-and-so, or you need to email so-and-so. You need to email Bethany, because she's going to tell you, she's going to help you. She's going to, hear you out and be fair with you and protect you if necessary. And I think that is, I think that's something you don't necessarily always have to have someone's name, especially if it's going to risk their livelihood, because especially like the instance with the restaurants, this restaurant industry can be a bit punitive. If you speak out on the record about a restaurant and then you move on to a different restaurant, some people will appreciate that. Some people will see you as a troublemaker, and it gets harder and harder to, especially the good restaurants, the sit down white tablecloth restaurants. They don't necessarily want troublemakers in there. So
how would you, I've been able to gain the confidence to say, tell people what you tell people, like, I don't recommend this, like, give them advice. There are some managers, I feel like, who do put the pressure on, like, we need them to talk or this isn't a story. Or at my last station, I know they were like, well, unless it's risking their safety, they need to be on camera. And sometimes I don't think that's the case, even in TV. Like, there's ways around that. What would you recommend people tell managers or editors who do say things like that, in a respectful way?
I like to point out that, and I think it's a little harder, possibly. I have a lot of friends that are in TV, and I think it's a little harder because you do move very quickly from story to story. I feel like in newspaper reporting, they do at least recognize when someone has expertise in a specific subject, and so you get the bulk of those stories. So if you say this person will absolutely be harmed in some way, your bosses tend to get it. But I think, just from knowing my friends that work in TV, they often will say that they get, one day they may be working one, a story about, a school district, or a school that got flooded, or something, and the next day they may be working a story about 100-car pileup in Fort Worth or whatever. So you don't get that you don't get that kind of gravitas, that credential behind you that says, she knows what she's talking about. She has to cultivate these sources. We don't want to jeopardize. But I think that always pointing out that this is someone that could be a good source, and then also just pointing out reputation.
I like that.
It's important to remember, do we want a reputation of not, it's going to make it, yes, I can put this person on camera, but we don't have to. I think also coming in with a good game plan for showing them how you can report the story without putting them on camera, is also important. But I think coming in and going, we don't have to put them on camera. And if we do, then we need to remember that this may make subsequent people reluctant to talk to us, which means that the other station's going to get the story, not us. We'll
going to help a lot of people. I really
I think that pointing out that people see, especially, I think it was easier to get people to talk on camera before the advent of the internet, and the advent of the soundbite.
Because it's just over, right?
Because it was, you'd have to get a rerun of a news story that WFAA ran. You had to go to a library or go to the station and ask to see the film, and and it was a whole production, and probably didn't happen. Now stations slice and dice and use this little bit that you said for a tease for the story.
Yeah.
And then some people never even go see the story. They just see the tease, and that's what they judge the whole story on, is this one little snippet that the person's your interview subject said. You're limited by time, just like I'm limited by inches. And so so I think when you realize these people are trusting us with their words and their reputation.
Yeah.
And we have, at any time someone's trusting you with their words and their reputation, but you're also constrained by time or space.
Yeah. Then
you have to default to, will this harm them in some way, by not being able to show the entire interview, or show the entire discussion, or am I going to be able to be fair to them within the constraints that I have for this broadcast or this print edition.
Yeah.
And I think that fairness is a journalistic trait that we're supposed to embrace. So pointing that, there's nowhere in any J class or J school where you're taught to be first,
Right.
taught to be fair.
Right. Right. Totally agree.
So
We've had such a good discussion today. I'm so excited to share this because I think what you've said, it will help people on multiple levels. So I appreciate
good.
Is there anything else that you want to add? I feel like we could talk all day.
And we probably can some other time. But no, I think that, I think people also, I will say this, if you're a young journalist, people always think, oh, the high point of a career would be working for the New York Times or working for a major metro daily. I have worked for a major metro daily. I have worked for startups. But I got to tell you, the best place I've honed my career and done my best work and learned the most was in community journalism. And so I think that, don't feel like, your career is a failure, or I applied for to this job for the New York Times, but they, I didn't get it, or, go look at these community newspapers. You're going to find some incredible opportunities. The very first community newspaper I worked for was after I graduated college, and I had worked for a paper in Fayetteville for a while. I went to a little town called Leonard, Texas. 1,800 people. It was a weekly newspaper. And when I took the job, I was like, oh, this is going to be so easy. I've come from a daily where we were, serving, almost 100,000 people. This is going to be easy. What possibly can happen? A lot can happen. I covered the county's first 3 murders in ages there. There was a lot to cover.
See the impact too. I think that's what, I've won awards, but it's really the impact when you actually have outcomes from your stories and changes. It's just like mind-blowing.
Some of this, I gotta say, some of the more interesting and scary stories that I ever covered were in Leonard. I remember I did a whole series on meth, because meth production and meth sales were a huge problem. It's a rural area, one of the poorest counties in Texas, and you have a lot of ag. And I did a story on how people make meth. I did stories on people who were recovering addicts. I did it from a law enforcement angle. How hard is it to catch people, that are selling it, producing it? Because you would literally be sitting there listening to the scanner at night, and you would hear multiple high-speed chases from farms, because anhydrous ammonia is a very popular thing to use to cook meth, and you get that from fertilizer tanks at farms. So people would drive up with their propane tanks and fill them with anhydrous ammonia, and then get caught by the police and drive off. And there'd be high-speed chases. Well, I did this whole series, and I think it was one night I covered a school board meeting and then sent the paper to bed, and it was probably about 11:30 at night, and it was dark, and I was the only one left at the paper. And it's a small town, and we were like maybe a block from the police station, so you felt relatively safe. But I went out to my car, and all of a sudden this guy comes out, and I know who he is, but I haven't reported on him because he's never really been arrested for anything, but he's the local meth guy. And he comes up, and it's dark, and I'm making, I'm like, I've got my keys in my hand, and I'm trying to make sure I keep the car between us, trying to be safe. I've got trying to like kind of quietly dig my phone out of my purse, so I can call my friend Kimberly, who was working that night at the police station. And he comes up and he goes, "What do you know?" And I would, I popped off with something a little, in retrospect, probably not a wise thing to be sarcastic, but it's like a chip in there that just flips. I went, can you be more vague?
Gosh. Oh my gosh.
And he goes,
I don't think I would have the balls to say that.
Really? He goes, what do you know about the meth? Or about the, what do you know? You've been writing about it. What do you know about it? And I'm like, I said, I know that you sell it. And he goes, are you going to write about that? I'm like, if you get caught. I said, yes. I said, unless you want to sit down for an interview right now. And he goes, no. And I'm like,
love that you offered him an interview. Oh my God.
That is why he was standing there, I'm like, so, I said, oh, what are we doing here? And he goes, I just wanted to know if you knew I was about to get busted. And I'm like, well, you sell meth, so eventually probably. And he goes, fair enough. And he left. Well, about a month later, I was sitting at the local diner, and the DA and a sheriff's deputy came in and, sat down. We were talking, it's just like, that's where everybody stops to eat. So, and I was sitting there, trying to grab a bite before I went on to cover someone else. They sat down and we started talking, and they're like, hey, do you remember old Jimmy? And I'm like, you're going to have to be, I'm like, a little more specific. We're in Texas. There's a lot of people named Jimmy. And he goes, the guy that sold meth. And I'm like, oh, yeah. I'm like, he goes, did you hear what happened to him? I'm like, no, did he get arrested? And she goes, no, we had a warrant. We went to his house. He'd cleared out. He moved.
Mad at you?
They were like, no, they didn't. I'm like, oh, well, that explains his questions. And they're like, what questions? And I'm like, oh yeah, Jimmy came by the office. And I totally look at, oh yeah, I came by the office one night and wanted to know if I knew if he was about to get busted. And I told him, and they were like, what did you tell him? I'm like, well, it's not like you guys tell me ahead of time who you're gonna bust. I said, that would be really cool if you did, but I know you won't. So
yeah.
I said, I
just like, duh, if you know, then obviously.
Right, we were just trying to build a case against him. So I'm like, yeah. I said, he wanted to know if I knew if he was going to get busted. And I said, what did you tell him? I said, well, you sell meth, so probably eventually.
That's a wild story.
And he's like, oh, okay. They were like, oh, or I guess he got scared, and it's come to find out, a couple of people that bought from him eventually told them that, he got a little worried and a little paranoid about all of the stories in the local paper about meth, and decided it was a good time to clear out before he got sent to prison.
He cleared out and cleaned up. Let's hope.
But yeah, I get. Those are the kind of stories that, I was not dragged. I was flown in business class by the federal government to Atlanta to testify in a federal trial when I had, with my 7-month-old and my husband. I got a subpoena maybe a week or two after he was born. To go testify in this trial about a story I wrote 2 years prior.
See, now, did you remember it? Because I was subpoenaed once and I had to give testimony, but it just had to be with in an office. They took my statement.
No, I apparently had to authenticate. I was the only person. The startup that I worked for had gone bankrupt, but when I worked there, this guy, it was when I was covering the stock market, and particularly the penny stock market, which is kind of super unregulated and kind of the Wild West. They have laws that they're supposed to follow the standard laws, making forward-looking statements and all that stuff. But we had a podcast that went, and typically we would write a story, about the podcast, about the I'd been investigating this company for a while, this guy for a while, because I knew that it was a bogus company. And he came on the podcast and proceeded to promise a woman that her stock that was currently worth like $5 was going to reset to 25 cents and then go up to $15. And this created a run on the company's stocks. And what was curious, and this is what I wrote about, part of what I wrote about was that they never seemed to run out of stock, out of shares. Like, there's supposed to be only a certain amount in the float. You're not supposed to issue more shares, but there was never any, we're issuing more shares. Anybody that bought stock got stock. Like they were just printing more of it or something. So I was writing about it, and I got right after the pod. I remember writing about what he said, because I was like, okay, that's not good. And trying to explain how this was illegal for him to have said, and improbable also, because penny stocks don't reset and don't move up to $15 a share. That just doesn't happen. That's like buying a guppy and expecting to get a dolphin one day. It doesn't happen. And so I get this call from the SEC while I was still working there going, hey, can we get a copy of that podcast, of the actual, interview? And I'm like, and I talked it over with my boss, and they're like, sure, fine. So, we took callers and everything, and a shareholder had asked, someone that owned stock and said, hey, what can we expect? And that's when he told her. So I sent it to him. We didn't think anything else about it. But I remember there had been an issue with me. Our email server wouldn't let me send a file size that big. So I'd used my personal Gmail account to get it sent to him. And then 2 years later, I get an email from the SEC, from an attorney, actually it's from the Department of Justice, and the SEC saying, hey, we need to know where you live now, kind of thing. And I'm like, so I went, and this is the craziest story too. This is like crazier than the meth guy. So I told him, I'm like, can't I just go? You've got an FBI office here. Yeah. Why can't I just, and you've got you've got the U.S. Attorney's office here. Why can't I just go do a video testimony or do it after I just had a baby? And like, no, we really need you in person. Wow. And we need to authenticate this tape. You're the only person left in your company that we can locate. And you're the person that sent us the tape. We need you to authenticate this. Oh, okay. So, they paid to fly me and my husband and child to Atlanta and put us up in a hotel and paid for our food and everything else. And I get there the day I'm supposed to testify, and I testified right before lunch. And there was a bit of arguing about whether or not I should be allowed to testify. And finally, and I had to state my, how I knew about the tape and how I heard about it and everything else. And, and then they played it, and you could see, I remember watching the jury, because I had nothing else to do while they were playing, and I was sitting up in the witness stand. I'm like, so I'm just like, I'm going to watch this. So I'm watching the jury, and you know how you kind of like stare at something, when you're listening, like it's just like
analyzing,
yeah. So they had been like, they just kind of been like staring, they were all kind of like staring off into space, different places, when it started. And then when he started talking about the share prices, it was like watching that scene in Jurassic Park where the compies all turn around at once and look at the guy after he crashes his, it's like they all turn around and look at the guy sitting there at the defendant's table. And so it was that was amusing. Well, I leave, they dismiss me, and I get on a plane with my husband and my kid and fly back home. I get home and there is a car and 2 police cars in front of our house. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe they're here for a neighbor. Maybe it's just something that happened. So I pull up and an FBI agent gets out of the car.
You're
and 2
causing
police.
ruckus.
And no, the guy fled during the lunch break.
Oh my gosh.
Like, while I was in the air, he went to lunch and never came back to court.
Oh my gosh.
So they were a little worried that he was headed my direction because that tape pretty much sealed the deal. It was pretty damning. So I had a detail for a while.
New baby. That's insane.
I felt super safe because I everywhere I went.
Wow. I'm not even going to ask if you want to add anything else because I feel like you could just keep going on and you just start.
So that was probably the weirdest thing so far I've ever.
Wow. I don't think I have anything to compare to that, but I'm pretty impressed with.
That was one of the crazier, I mean, like it was a story I wrote 2 years, before. I never, I hadn't even thought about that guy.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild.